Hello, we are on Chapter 4, Child Psychology. We're going to talk about birth and the newborn. I'm going to go over the main important concepts in this chapter. So let's get started. It says, what happens when a child is born? So we talked about in the last few chapters that you should really focus on a specific plan for your future when the child is born. So now you have to focus on these four things. There are social interactions, there are emotional interactions, physical. Um, by that I mean like how they're growing up, what you're feeding them, uh, what kind of percentiles are they at. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then their cognitive development. Are you going to read to them? Are you going to put them to bed while they're crying and walk out of the room? There's so many cognitive things that are important for this. So you have to think of you and your significant other. Think of your schedule, think of your job, how much money you have or don't have, and lifestyle. Just so you know, you're never going to have enough money to raise a family in your ideal fashion, but it definitely works out if you have a plan and you have enough money to survive on a little bit extra. Statistics. The U.S. infant mortality, if you look at it, it was 6.7 per 1,000 births. Now, if you look at it, um, the maternal mortality, that's the moms, theirs is 12.1 per 100,000. So 1940, it was 47 babies died. In 2006, there's only like a little over 6.5 are passing away on average. If you look at the moms, in 1915, 600, almost 8 out of 100,000 are dying, but now it's only 12.1. So, and that's just because of the modern medicine and washing your hands is the biggest part, especially with COVID now and the viruses that go around today. Washing your hands is a key uh, proponent to keep you safe. Childbirth options: high versus low risk pregnancy. So, a hospital. In a hospital, you have a very low risk of um, any issues, and your numbers will be close to what we saw on this page. Now, a home birth, whole family can be there. You can be freestanding in birth places, so you can stand up at a desk. You can hold on to, um, like if you were doing dips on a workout machine, you could hold on to something like that, and gravity can help take that place. Whereas in a hospital, you're laying in a bed, semi propped up. There's midwives or nurse midwives that will come to your house and help you, and you'll have a plan and you'll go through. And that's actually becoming a little more popular. Uh, One thing that you should definitely have is a birth plan. So before you do have a baby, and after you talk about all the stuff you're going to do with the baby, you need a plan to actually have a baby. What are we going to do? How are we going to do this? Are we going to have a midwife? Are we doing it in the hospital? Am I going to have medication versus no medication? Um, and at the bottom, there's a little asterisk there. The AMA opposes home births due to complications and higher risk. If something happens, there's obviously not a doctor there. There's not a medical team. There's nothing. So complication could cost the mother or the baby their life, or unfortunately both of them. The birthing process. When you go into labor, that is the process of when you're actually giving birth. Parturition is the actual term for when birth is completed. Um, the interesting part about this is 2 weeks before it begins, you release a hormone, CRH, to promote fetal lungs, and it contracts the uterus and cervix, which makes it more flexible. So think of if you squeeze your two hands together, your thumb and your pointer finger, and you squeeze it. That sort of looks like a birth canal. Now, 2 weeks before, it's going to become a little more flexible. So if you loosen your hand up a little bit and like spring them back and forth, that's where you'll get the movement and a little more flexibility. Um, One of the problems is you'll start having Braxton Hicks contractions, and that's where muscles tighten and then loosen. So what you're doing is um, a kind of a crude comparison is if you've ever seen a snake eat something, its muscles contract and then release, contract and then release, contract and release, and it constricts it to pushing down. So that's kind of what a female is doing when she's giving birth. Her muscles are pushing instead of swallowing; they're pushing out, and then the baby will come out. There's stages of childbirth. So the cervix has to be dilated 10 centimeters. So once that is dilated or somewhere close to that, you're in. You have to go. Um, you'll have contractions 2 to 5 minutes apart, and that's where it starts to become very painful. Um, when my wife and I went through this 3 times, they did not get any easier for the contractions and that part. But the part two, the emergence of the baby, that became a lot easier after the first one. And then after up to about an hour late after you give birth, then you have the placenta, or afterbirth, sometimes it's called. You'll give birth to that, and then that is taken. Stages of childbirth, you'll see picture. If you want to pause it, you can. Stages of labor, you'll see where the head is down there. One of the issues where you might have sometimes the head is like cockeyed and there will be a shoulder in the birth canal. If you look at the bottom picture, you'll see the cervical dilation, and in the very beginning, 0 to 3 centimeters, not much going on. It stretches very slowly. Sometimes it takes a long time, but the female will really know, like, oh, something's happening, but I feel weird. Like, you go to the hospital, sometimes they'll send you home. But once you hit that 3 to 4 centimeters, you're probably staying at the hospital. Sometimes you'll get stuck, and then they'll have to help you. Sometimes they'll give you a needle, and they'll increase the birthing process by speeding it up a little bit. Options, you have options. You can go vaginal. You can do a cesarean. That's where they cut below your belly button to take the baby out, and obviously it would not come out of the birth canal. Medicated versus not. So do you want to use all natural, like I just want to go and not have any medication? It's up to you. You can get a doula, which is an experienced mentor. My aunt was like very much like a doula to us. She was in 2 out of the 3 of our children being born, and she was in there. She was like, all right, you can do it. You got this. I went through this. I know you can do it again. And she was really, really, really positive, very energetic. She was more adamant when she was talking to doctors. Like, she knew a lot more than me, only having done it once or twice before. She knew what to ask for. She had that experience that is very helpful when you're in that position, because it's a stressful spot. You don't know what's going on the first time. When I was in there the first time, my aunt wasn't there, and she actually, the nurse that was there was like, all right, you have to grab a leg. My eyes almost bulged out of my head. I was like, grab a leg? Wait a minute, I'm supposed to just hang out over here and support from a distance and help my wife. And I was in there, and I was holding legs and getting squeezed, and it was something different that I wasn't prepared for. All right, newborn baby. We talked about this a little bit in the last one. The neonate up to 4 weeks old, it'll come out at an average weight somewhere around 7.5 pounds, about 20 inches long. That first week after you do give birth, the baby will drop weight. You have to pay attention very closely to weight, because if it doesn't gain the weight back, then you actually have to possibly bring the baby back in and give it fluids and make sure it gets up back to that birth weight. Um, Sometimes the cord gets wrapped around the baby, and that'll cause a lack of oxygen. That's called anoxia. They can have jaundice. That's where they have that yellow um, tinge to their skin. We talked about the APGAR scale. That's where they measure everything from the pulse, the heart rate. Um, they measure their reactions, their respiration, their activity, and kangaroo care we also talked about in the last chapter, which is that skin to skin, lay it right on the mother or now father's chest, and try to sync up their heart rate and start that bonding process. This is really really neat, having a Himalayan baby. So the female starts in a kneeling position, and the children in their group watch to see what's going on, but husbands do not. So it's just women and children. So the women handles the delivery, and they help each other, and then they dispose of the placenta and the umbilical cord. And if the baby doesn't emerge, they use a shaman to help. So if you're not sure what a shaman is, that's a person who is very spiritual. Um, in the culture that they're in, shamans can be different, but very spiritual, using earth as their guide, and they try to help through that ceremony that they put on. After 4 and 7, for a girl and a boy, they have a ceremony to name them. So you don't have a name for 4 to 7 years, depending on your sex. So think about that as a different way of handling having a baby. All right, supportive environment and birth complications. Women always deal better with this. Um, Men struggle because we're not in control. There's not tasks that we can do. We're kind of put on the back burner, because everything revolves around the mom and the baby. Um, there are protective factors, um, individual attributes. There's energy, sociability, intelligence, how affectionate you are, rewards at school, work, place of worship, a sense of meaning and control. So these are the things that um, a female and male have to deal with. Like when you walk into school, do you think you are supported? What is your energy level like? How sociable are you with other people around you? Many of my classes, a lot of people like to be loners. They like to be left alone and just do their work, and then they give a little bit of themselves. Other people will talk the whole time in class, and sometimes a little too much. Your affectionate stage matters. How affectionate are you? Are you more of a cold person where you're just black and white, yes and no, or are you very caring? Like, oh, how do you feel? How you doing? Always checking on each other. Um, so these are the things that help support or not. Newborns and parents. So this is where you really have to start thinking about your life and how you were raised and how your family raises kids. So what did your family do with infants? So what was the male versus the female role? My wife and I in this position, we took um, a 50-50 split on this. I tried to do as much as I could to have bottles ready, get up in the middle of the night, stay up with the kids while she slept so she could be fresh for her morning routines and everything. And then I would do that until I was exhausted, and then she would take over. We would try to go back and forth 50-50, but some nights it was 100% her, some nights it was 100% me, and it just bounced off each other. So think of the differences between males and females and how they interact with infants. So sometimes people don't want anything to do with babies, and they're kind of like, oh no, I'm not sure what to do. I know when they told me to take my first child home, they were like, all right, you can go. And my wife and I looked at each other and we were like, go where? We're in the hospital. Why would we leave? You're supposed to take care of us for a little while. And on the second day, it wasn't even like 6, maybe 8 hours into the second day, they were like, all right, you can go. It was probably 9 o'clock, and we ended up leaving by 11. And then we were like, oh man, what do we do now? Like, we have this baby at home. We have no help, no support. Um, if she doesn't, my wife breastfed, so if they didn't attach, there's that issue. Um, but we always knew we had to keep the baby close because you have to keep the baby with you as much as possible in the very beginning to develop that bond, mother and father. And we talked about imprinting earlier with Lorenz, that form of attachment where the first moving object you see, you really connect with. You don't have to believe in that, but just think of the baby seeing its mom in the very beginning. They start that bonding right away. All right, your parental roles. Newborn needs from the mother, newborn needs from the father. So these are things that you would list down, and we would talk about these in class. If we're in class, we'll talk about them. If we're not, this stuff that you think a mother and a father should do. It could be the exact same list. Obviously, breastfeeding is not something the father can do, but he could give bottles. Right? He could set up warm the breast milk up, because that does take time, and then everything take time from the mom is less sleep she's getting, which could make her more irritable or harder to focus, when she could be focusing on the baby. So keep all those things in mind. Um, how does parenthood affect marital satisfaction? Oh man, there are huge declines during the early child raising years. Just think of why, right? You guys are going out in the very beginning of your relationship, regardless of who you're dating. Usually in the beginning, it's all you guys, right? You have a little bit of money, you go out, you do things, you set up dates, right? You have quiet time, right? Then you get married, or maybe you didn't get married and you have a baby. You have the baby. Let me take one step back. When you're pregnant, the wife gets all the attention. Everyone that sees her says hi to her. Oh my God, she's like floating on cloud nine during that pregnancy because of the attention that she receives. Then you have the baby. Now the child gets all the attention. Then you guys go home, and now you guys are, in a sense, in the trenches of raising a kid that you are on the job training with. So you're making mistakes, you're not sleeping right, you might start to argue, you have to make decisions that are quicker than maybe you normally would make them. So that's a big deal. So all those things come into play. And then if you have to throw in work, you have to go back to work, whole nother issue. If you're having money problems, whole nother issue. Sometimes you work at night. I remember this one story. Um, I had to go away. I was doing my doctorate work, and I had to go away for like 4 days for a residency. And my wife was just like, "What? You're leaving?" Like, I don't think it dawned on her until the actual time that I was leaving that I wasn't going to be there to help out. And I know that took a huge toll on her because it was 4 days without help. And luckily, I think one of her friends came up for a day and helped out and gave her a little support. But, those decisions, like, I was still going to school trying to continue my doctoral work when we were having kids. So that put an additional stressor on our relationship. So here's a couple things. You guys can read. You can pause this. I don't need to read it to you. All right. And that's the end of our show. So definitely think back to the very beginning of the slideshow. Most important thing is, how are you going to have this baby? Think about those things. You and your significant other, what's your schedule like, your job, your money, and the lifestyle that you want to live.